Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're on page 183 of the Pure Worship book in the chapter Gog, I am against you,
Yeah, something
or
like
I am against you, O Gog.
Mm.
And this is the subhead, the land. What is it? And one is tempted to make a joke at the beginning. Could it be land? Because by the
Nope.
time you finish these four paragraphs, it can be anything but land, right?
Yeah,
Because the imagination of the Watchtower leaders and writers is at work all the time to
yeah.
make it something other than what it says.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start into the paragraphs anyway. I'm reading from the screen as usual, and that is our television screens staring off into the distance. Vivian's got the book in front of her. So here we go.
As we learned in paragraph 3, Gog of Magog will provoke Jehovah's great rage by invading a land that is precious to Jehovah. What land is this? Let us return to Ezekiel's prophecy, and in bold they have, read Ezekiel 38, 8 to 12.
We'll do that.
It says that Gog will invade the land whose people have been restored. That's in quotes. Invade the land whose people have been restored. And another in quotes, regathered from the nations. End
Unquote.
of their quote.
Yeah.
Note too what it says about the restored worshippers who reside in this land. They, quote, dwell in security, end of quote. Their settlements are, quote, unprotected by walls, bars, or gates, end of quote. And they, quote, are accumulating wealth, end of quote. This is the land in which Jehovah's pure worshippers earthwide reside. How can we identify it?
It is helpful to consider the restoration that happened in ancient Israel, the land where God's chosen people lived, worked, and worshipped for centuries. When the Israelites proved unfaithful, Jehovah, through Ezekiel, foretold that their land would be devastated and left desolate. But Jehovah also prophesied that a repentant remnant would later return from exile in Babylon and restore pure worship in the land. With Jehovah's blessing, the land of Israel would be transformed, flourishing, like the Garden of Eden. And that phrase, like the Garden of Eden, is in quotation marks. Mm-hmm. Nothing else in this paragraph so far was. And they cite here Ezekiel 36, which we'll look at in a few minutes. That restoration took place starting in 537 BCE, when Jewish exiles returned to Jerusalem to restore true worship in their beloved homeland.
In modern times, God's pure worshippers experienced a similar restoration. As we learned in chapter 9 of this publication, by 1919, God's people were freed from the long captivity in Babylon the Great. In that year, Jehovah brought his restored worshippers into a spiritual land. That land is the spiritual paradise, the secure, spiritually prosperous environment or realm of activity in which we worship the true God. In this land, we dwell together in security, with peace of mind and heart. We receive an abundance of spiritual food, and we have plenty of satisfying work to do in proclaiming God's kingdom. Indeed, we experience the truth of the proverb, it is the blessing of Jehovah that makes one rich, and he adds no pain with it. No matter where we may live on this earth, we are in this land, the spiritual paradise, as long as we are actively supporting pure worship in word and in deed.
This spiritual land is precious to Jehovah. Why? In his eyes, its inhabitants are the precious things of all the nations, individuals whom he has drawn to pure worship. They are earnestly endeavoring to put on a new personality, one that reflects God's own lofty qualities. As pure worshippers, they offer themselves fully in his service, doing so in ways that glorify him and prove their love for him. We can only imagine the joy that must fill Jehovah's heart as he sees his worshippers working hard to beautify the spiritual land, Just think, by giving pure worship priority in your life, you not only beautify the spiritual paradise, but also make Jehovah's heart rejoice.
So there's 6 times in those, it's not 5, it's 6 times they use the phrase spiritual land or spiritual paradise in the last 2 paragraphs.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Well, they're planting an idea in your head. But if you read the text, it doesn't say spiritual anywhere. You want to make an application to modern day witnesses. So you just stick in a phrase, and you can make anything mean anything if you use the word spiritual ahead of it.
I'm afraid so. And what's wrong with this, other than the fact that it's not in the text, which we're going to read in a minute, Ezekiel anywhere, it's not in the whole Bible, i.e. the idea of spiritual paradise is nowhere in the Bible. So what is in the Bible? Paradise, the word paradise, 3 times in the New Testament, and depending on which Old Testament you're using, it might be in there 1 or 2 times too. But never is it coupled with the word spiritual. It's always paradise. And what did paradise mean to the Jews in Jesus' day? It could be an earthly paradise. Garden of Eden, as you cite in here, taking it literally for once. Garden of Eden after the exile, right? Okay, it might mean that. Or the Jews had 2 other notions about paradise. One was that it was in the 3rd heaven, 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about that one. And another one that it could be in Hades. It was the place of favor, the room of favor within Hades. And whichever notion, none of them are spiritual paradise.
That's right, and I think the biggest portion they're thinking about is the coming Messiah ruling on the earth, a kingdom.
And restoring paradise, not to the whole world, but to Israel at least.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's the other phrase, the even more dangerous one, which is spiritual land. That's not in the Bible either.
Yeah.
So what is land? You actually have made God unable to speak for himself here by rendering everything in the way you want it to read.
It's propaganda.
That's the definition of propaganda, yeah. So this arbitrariness, and of course the whole contextual thing here, you want to understand Ezekiel 38, 39 about Gog of Magog, but you don't want to pay attention to even the immediate context, but even more important than the immediate is the larger context, i.e. you must ignore Ezekiel 36 and 37 in order to interpret 38 this way.
One thing that I found really alarming is the quotes, these little partial quotes that they've been doing a lot in this book. Just phrases, few words. But they're not even in sequence in the account. So they're switching them around to fit their paragraph without context even in mind. This is a crime.
It's a crime. It's a crime against God's own word, for sure.
Yeah.
It's insidious because it does imply at least that you know what you're doing.
They know they have to select this phrase, this phrase, this phrase, and piece it all together in a paragraph to make it sound like what you want the Watchtower, the witnesses, to believe.
Now you've only suggested here. You basically in bold you put read Ezekiel 38 8 to 12, which we will now do, which is only 5 verses out of several dozen verses in these chapters. So what does the context of Ezekiel 38 even suggest as to the true meaning of all of this? Well, let's just read those verses.
Okay.
From the New World Translation, even better.
Okay. You will be given attention after many days. In the final part of the years, you will invade the land whose people have been restored from the ravages of the sword, collected together out of many peoples, onto the mountains of Israel, which had long been lying devastated. The inhabitants of this land were restored from the peoples, and all of them dwell in security. So you had at least two partial quotes here in these verses. Whose people have been restored, invade the land whose people have been restored, and dwell in security. But that's the only parts that you...
Yeah.
you bother to quote.
And then in verse 11 and 12, they quote a few more phrases, right?
Yeah. So from 9, you will come against them like a storm, and you will cover the land like clouds, you and all your troops, and many peoples with you. This is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. And in that day thoughts will come up into your heart, and you will devise an evil plan. And you will say, I will invade the land of unprotected settlements. I will come against those living in security without disturbance, all of them living in settlements. And then you quote, unprotected by walls, bars, or gates. That's all you quote from that verse. Then it continues, it will be to take much spoil and plunder, to attack the devastated places that are now inhabited, and a people, and then they quote, regathered from the nations, end of their part of the quote, who, then they quote, are accumulating wealth, end of the quote, they give you, and property, those who are living in the center of the earth. So they had just pieced together phrases because of what they want to tell you, a modern day application to this. But it won't work if you read the whole context.
So what phrases here that they've completely left out would completely change the picture? How about the end of verse 12? They're living, that is securely, at the center of the earth. If you read earlier in Ezekiel, you'll find out the center of the earth is Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
So the land is one thing, but the city is, that's not named at all in your account of this. The center of the earth is Jerusalem. So what else have they left out? The people who are gathered from many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual waste.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, what the goal of these people who are looking on, including Gog, is, which is to take plunder.
Yeah.
Well, is that spiritual wealth that Gog is after? Or is it wealth?
I think 13 tells you it's real wealth. It's literal.
Let's read 13. The verse that they end at is 12, right? Let's go on to 13.
Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all its warriors will say to you, are you invading to get much spoil and plunder? Have you assembled your armies to carry off silver and gold, to take wealth and property, to seize a very great spoil? That sounds literal.
What can we say about this except you've deliberately contorted the context here? Because obviously invasions happen to lands because of what we would say is literal wealth, riches. They don't want your spiritual wealth.
You're also in your paragraphs trying to place. You're not placing this in the last days of Israel's history, like the last days where God acts on them. You've taken it out of context and made it apply to just a time when they're
returning from
exile from Babylon too. But there's further history for these people, and you've ignored that history.
They do cite some verses from chapter 36. We accuse them at the beginning of missing the larger context. That all you have to do is read 36 and 37 if you want to know how to interpret 38
But they've been
properly.
very selective there too.
But what are the verses they've cited here? Because they don't quote them in the...
Yeah. 36, they say 36 verses.
They quote part of it, like a phrase or two from it, right? But not the whole 3 verses.
Yeah, so it's 36, 34 to 36 is what they suggest you read. So 34 to 36 says, the desolate land that was lying desolate for everyone passing by to see will be cultivated. The people will say, the desolate land has become like the Garden of Eden. That's the part they quote, Garden of Eden, just that phrase.
And what does it say after that?
And the cities that were in ruins and desolate and torn down are now fortified and inhabited. And the nations that are left remaining around you will have to know that I myself, Jehovah, have built what was torn down, and I have planted what was desolate. I myself, Jehovah, have spoken, and I have done it.
Again, as with 38, all you have to do is read the immediate context and you know what's wrong with this application of it.
Yeah.
Why did you only take the phrase like the Garden of Eden?
Yeah,
Well, because, interesting though, you take that literally here. It's about a restored Eden paradise in Israel after they came back from the exile. So, contradiction in the way you do your hermeneutics. But the key idea here is that the same people who have been removed from the land are now going back to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not truly a restoration, is it? It's a replacement. You have replaced them in God's affections and in prophecy. Whereas in the context, all you have to read is a couple of verses. In addition to what we just read the verse before, verse 33.
Verse 33 says, "This is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. In the day that I cleanse you from all your guilt, I will cause the cities to be inhabited and the ruins to be rebuilt."
So this restoration is not just about putting you back in your land and hoping for the best. It's about curing you from your iniquities. The ESV says, in the day that I cleanse you from all your iniquities. That involves guilt, yes, i.e. forgiveness, but also transformation.
Which can only happen when the Spirit falls on them, and that's future.
So if you go back, and we challenge everybody who doubts what we're saying here about the context, read all of 36, especially from 36:22 onward, and you'll see what the context is. It is a day when God cleanses Israel from all its iniquities, not only forgives them, puts them back in their land, but then sanctifies his name in respect to them. And we'll put a link on to our video on that subject later.
Just even notice verse 28 really stands out. "Then you will dwell in the land that I gave your forefathers." What are you going to do with that? It's the land he gave to your forefathers. He's talking to the nation of Israel.
And
literally,
you shall be...
and their family were promised this land.
They were his people, obviously, in the days of their fathers, and especially in the days of the patriarchs. They were a thought. They weren't even in existence yet, but they were a people, a great nation. Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. A great nation that he would make out of the patriarchs. And he says here, "You shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I will be your God." It's absolutely clear in the context what he's talking about.
And if you were going to make some kind of modern day application to it, think of the number of years that Israel was outside of their land, wandering, exiles. And then in more recent times, they have returned to their land. And when they did return, they restored areas that were like wilderness into, and called it almost the Garden of Eden in its the way it looked.
So that part has been partially fulfilled already, but they haven't been transformed yet. So those who push back on this will simply say, well, look at the way they live. They don't even believe in Moses, let alone in Jesus. This is true, but we see this is part of a process. The Garden of Eden part is the easy part.
Yeah.
The hard part is the transforming of human hearts.
Yeah, and to apply it then to make it spiritual and about yourselves. Which one is a stronger image of what this is describing? It's not you becoming spiritual in your paradise, your spiritual paradise.
Just flash those pictures from those two pages at everybody. See, what is this all being applied to is Kingdom Halls.
Yeah.
The Garden of Eden for you has become building Kingdom Halls and gardening, apparently, because you see people with wheelbarrows there working on Kingdom Hall.
It's the construction of a Kingdom Hall, I guess.
And of course, it's the spiritual paradise is, above all things, being loyal to the organization that calls itself the only organization.
Yeah, yeah.
So all those happy Jehovah's Witnesses, and then you realize what any religion can really do this. Any denomination we know, and some are very famous for it. Like the Mormons, for instance, are very famous for showing pictures of happy families. But if you do it too. But it's propaganda.
But if you look up a Bible commentary, a scholarly Bible commentary on Ezekiel, they're not going to show you happy pictures of anybody. Not happy pictures of Christians and apply it to themselves, because they know it's not about them.
It's not about them. So they will talk about the text, and if there are pictures, they'll be about the text. There'll be maps or pictures from ancient archaeological digs, etc., etc.
Right.
And that's a respect for the text. You're dealing with the text as the Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
You might disagree with the interpretation, and we often do, but the point is the people who do that and write Bible commentaries on books like Ezekiel take years out of their lives to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they give you something worth reading, even if you don't agree with all the interpretations of it.
Yeah.
And this is not worth reading, really. We're only doing this as a labor of love, because you have to understand, if you're a Jehovah's Witness or even a ex-JW who has reservations about Bible commentaries, let's say, realize that this is propaganda, pure.
Yeah.
Pure? Is that the right word for propaganda? Pure propaganda.
Pure propaganda, yeah. But I think, too, the reason we especially wanted to do the one on Ezekiel was because this was a big issue for us when we were leaving the Witnesses. We had started reading the Old Testament and just believing it, reading it, and if it didn't have the word spiritual in there. So I started to see the Bible in a new way when I just read it and believed what it said. And I could see this is not about us. You have to do real mighty tricks to make it about you.
And they do.
Yeah.
What's our link?
We have a video called, we have a series that's called Paradise Lost for Jehovah's Witnesses. And the one on Ezekiel chapter 36, we're going to put that one on. So that's the number 14 in that series.
And if we're good little boys and girls, we'll remember to put that playlist on for you too, right?
Yeah. Okay.
See you next time.
Bye.